You're not even invited. You embarrass us. My father's voice pierced the air, loud enough to stop conversations and turn heads. I stood at the front gate of the estate holding the pie I'd baked, trembling like a leaf in the wind. The cold November breeze nipped at my cheeks, but nothing stung more than his words. My hands clenched the ceramic dish tighter, the heat long gone. From behind him, my mother appeared in her burgundy shawl, her eyes darting between guests and the gravel driveway. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she looked down and whispered, "Just leave quietly." That was it. That was all I got. No embrace. No defense. No ounce of warmth from the woman who once held my hair back when I was sick. But then, a heavy thud shook the table under the tent. Silverware rattled, glasses trembled, and all heads turned. "That's enough." The voice boomed like thunder. My grandfather, Edward Langston, the man whose approval this entire family lived and died for, rose from his chair with a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. His hand still rested flat on the wooden table he'd just slammed, his gold wedding band catching the overhead lights. He looked at me, not with pity, not with shame, but with something close to pride. "You don't speak to her like that," he said sharply to my father. "Not after what you did." Gasps. My Uncle David spilled wine on his tie. My Aunt Margaret blinked like her world was tilting. My father's face drained. "Dad, don't start this." But Grandpa Edward was already walking. Not fast, but with the slow, shaking certainty of a man who had carried truths for far too long. He stopped in front of me. "Come inside, Olivia," he said. "You're not just invited, you belong here more than any of them." The world tilted again, but this time in my direction. My hands trembled, still clutching the pie dish like a shield. "Why now?" I asked softly, tears building. He exhaled through his nose. "Because silence has cost you too much already. And they're about to learn what it's cost me." He turned toward the crowd. "You want a gathering? Let's gather around the truth. Because I'm tired of the lies that built this table." And with that he asked me to follow him. I did. My heels clicked on the flagstone path, past the stunned faces of relatives who once ignored my birthday, past cousins who whispered I was the family dropout, past the judgmental stares of people who never really knew me. Inside, by the fireplace, he pulled a faded envelope from his coat pocket. My mother stepped in behind him, looking as pale as porcelain. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the hardwood floor. "I didn't raise my son to be this cold," Grandpa said, staring at my father. "But I'm done punishing Olivia for his choices. Because what none of you know is..." He stopped. His hand shook slightly as he held the envelope. Then he looked at me. "This is about you now. You decide who gets to hear it." I stood there, my throat tight, every childhood humiliation clawing at my ribs. The pie dish was still in my hands. I gently placed it down on the side table, stood straighter and said, "Read it." And that's when everything began to unravel. My grandfather's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The seal brittle, like it had waited years to finally break. The room was so quiet you could hear the firewood shift in the hearth. My relatives were frozen just inside the doorway, unsure whether to stay or leave, but unable to look away. He unfolded the papers and cleared his throat, his voice gruff and low. 31 years ago I made a decision I've regretted every day since. A decision to protect the image of this family, at the cost of someone who never deserved the punishment. My father stepped forward. "Dad, enough. Don't drag old stories into this." Grandpa turned sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "You dragged it, son. The day you told Olivia's mother you'd handle things. The day you lied to this entire family about what really happened." He looked back at me. My breath caught in my throat. "Olivia is not some outsider we tolerate out of obligation. She's the only rightful heir to this family's legacy." Gasps. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "What does he mean, heir? Is this about the trust fund? She's not even in the will, is she?" My Aunt Margaret stood up. "Dad, are you saying she's the primary beneficiary?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes. Olivia was always meant to inherit the Langston estate. Not because she earned it, though Lord knows she has, but because it was her birthright. Your father," he pointed to my dad, "hid the original amendment to my will. Replaced it with a draft that left her out entirely." My knees nearly buckled. "Why?" I asked, staring at my father. Why would you erase me like that? He opened his mouth but no sound came out. His eyes flared then dropped to the floor. Cowardice in its purest form. Grandpa turned to the others. You all called her a dropout. Lazy. Irresponsible. But did any of you know that she worked 2 jobs to keep her mother's medical bills paid? That she gave up college because her scholarship required family cosigners and none of you? He scanned the room, lifted a single pen. My mother sat down suddenly as if her legs gave out beneath the weight of it all. I asked her to leave quietly, she whispered broken, because I didn't want the fighting to ruin today. I looked at her, eyes stinging. You watched them humiliate me every time and never said a word. Why now? She didn't answer. Grandpa took a step forward and handed me the papers. This is the real will. Notarized. Legal. Collective. You own the Langston property now. And everything that comes with it. The family business. The house. The name. I looked down at it. My hands trembled not from excitement, but from disbelief. Grief. Bigger. The same people who laughed at me just moments ago now looked at me like I was a stranger holding their future. What you do next is up to you, Grandpa said. You can burn it all down. Or build something better. But don't let them write your story anymore. I glanced at my father who still hadn't said a word. I looked at the crowd that had always pushed me to the edge. And for the first time, I felt power in my silence. The weight of the document in my hands was crushing. Every signature, every notarized stamp, every page etched with the name Olivia Langston confirmed what I had never dared to believe. I wasn't an embarrassment. I was the future of this family. I looked up slowly, feeling the atmosphere shift. The whispers had grown teeth. Jealousy, disbelief, and panic hung in the air like fog. Then came the voice I expected, sharp, bitter, and desperate. You can't just hand her everything. My cousin Brad, the golden boy, the next in line, the one who once stuffed my shoes with shaving cream during Christmas because I walked weird, stepped forward. I gave up a job in New York because I thought I was taking over the family business. I've worked my ass off for this family, Grandpa. Grandpa's expression didn't budge. You worked for a title. Olivia worked for survival. Brad scoffed, pacing. She's not even, she dropped out. She's just some waitress with a second-hand car and a podcast no one listens to. That one hurt. I had poured every ounce of myself into that podcast. Late nights. Unpaid interviews. Borrowed mics. I had built a small, loyal following who believed in truth and raw honesty, things my own family refused to value. I stepped forward. You think what I do is worthless because it doesn't benefit you. He sneered. No. I think it's pathetic that you're standing here acting like you belong, just because Grandpa got soft in his old age. That's when I felt it, the heat rising in my chest. Not embarrassment this time. Rage. You bullied me for years, I said calmly. All of you did. Mocked my clothes, my choices, my voice. And now that I have something you want, suddenly I'm worth noticing? No one replied. I turned to Grandpa. Is it true? I control everything now. He nodded, eyes steady. It's all yours. Legally and ethically. What you do next is your legacy. I scanned the room. Familiar faces. Fake smiles. And some stunned silence. Then I made my first decision. Everyone who ever voted to cut me out of this family, I want your keys to the property on my desk by Monday. Gasps again. Brad started to protest but I cut him off. Don't worry. I won't make you work for someone you think is beneath you. Then I added, eyes locked on my father. But if you want a seat at the table you're going to have to earn it. The same way I did. My father's mouth twitched like he might finally speak. Then he simply sat down. Defeated. Maybe ashamed. Maybe just tired of hiding. And that's when I knew. It was over. Not the pain. Not the journey. But the chapter where I stood outside the gate, pie in hand, hoping for someone to let me in. Now, they would wait for me to open the door. The next morning the estate felt different. I stood barefoot in the study, my study now, surrounded by walls of old books and echoes of conversations I was never meant to hear. Light filtered through stained glass windows, soft and golden. The same room that once belonged to my grandfather now belonged to me. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. Taking over the Langston legacy sounded grand when my name was still a whisper in this house. But now it was stitched into every legal document, whispered through family group chats, and etched into the marble plaque at the office entrance downtown. The phone hadn't stopped buzzing all morning. Voicemails from concerned uncles, emails from financial advisors I hadn't appointed, and 3 separate requests from Brad to talk privately. And then came a knock at the door. I opened it to find my mother standing there. No makeup. No performance. "Can I come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside. She walked slowly, eyes grazing over the study like she hadn't been inside for years. "Your grandfather was always a fortress," she whispered. "But he had a soft spot for you. I should have seen it coming." I folded my arms. "But you didn't. You looked away. Every single time." She turned to face me, finally meeting my eyes. I was scared. Of him. Or of what it would mean to protect me. Her silence answered both. "You used to be proud of me," I said quietly. "Remember the first time I sang on stage? You cried." She smiled faintly. "You wore that yellow dress with the crooked hemline. You were glowing." I blinked quickly, fighting back tears. I didn't want this conversation to confuse me. I didn't want to remember soft things. Because she wasn't soft when they laughed at me. She wasn't soft when she whispered, "Just leave quietly." "Why didn't you stand up for me?" She swallowed hard. "Because your father told me it was better to keep the family from falling apart. He said you were strong enough to take it." I laughed bitterly. I was never supposed to take it. I was supposed to be protected. She nodded. Fully. Then from her purse she pulled out an old cassette tape. "This was recorded the day you were born. Your grandfather, he made this for you." I took it gently, fingers tracing the worn plastic. It was labeled in faded ink. "Olivia. Day 1. He knew they wouldn't love you the way he did," she said. "But he believed one day, you'd fight your way back to where you belonged." I sat down in the old leather chair, the cassette in my lap, my throat tight. "It shouldn't have taken 31 years, I whispered. She nodded again. This time with a tear slipping down her cheek. "No. It shouldn't have." And for once, she didn't try to fix it. She just sat beside me quiet. That night I played the tape. And I listened as a younger version of my grandfather spoke softly into a recorder. "Olivia, you don't know this yet. But one day you're going to remind this family what it means to feel. To fight. To forgive. And when you do, don't let them shrink you again." I sat alone in the dark, hands clasped tightly, and let myself cry. Not because I was weak. But because I was finally allowed to. The air inside Langston Manor was different now. Heavier. Not with tension but with purpose. For the first time in over 3 decades, the estate's grand halls no longer echoed with condescension or cold formality. They breathed. They hummed with a shift so deep, it had begun to rattle the bones of everyone who once walked these halls thinking their power was permanent. I stood at the top of the winding staircase, overlooking the front atrium where a sea of unfamiliar faces had gathered, lawyers, board members, employees from the family business, even reporters who waited silently beyond the wrought iron gates. All of them here not because of Edward Langston or William Langston but because of me, Olivia Langston. The girl they once refused to acknowledge. The woman they now had no choice but to face. I took a deep breath, my heels echoing on the wood as I descended the steps. Each footfall was deliberate. Measured. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the heir, the owner, and the leader of a legacy they tried to write me out of. As I entered the room, every conversation died. Heads turned. Some stood. Some didn't. And then, my father. William Langston. Standing stiffly near the fireplace, jaw tight, arms crossed. I walked past him without flinching. Because today wasn't about him. Today was about drawing a new line in the soil of a family that had rotted from the inside. And planting something new. I turned to face them all. "You all know why you're here," I said calmly but with authority. "The Langston Foundation is being restructured. Effective immediately." Brad, arms folded, immediately scoffed. "So that's it? You sweep in after decades of doing nothing and just take control?" I smiled. Composed. "I didn't do nothing. I survived all of you." A murmur rippled through the room. "You ran this family like a private club," I continued. "Only those who followed the rules, kissed the rings, and kept quiet got access. But no more. The foundation moving forward will fund underrepresented students. The family trust will be audited. The business," I turned to the financial advisor, will be evaluated for corruption and backdoor dealings. Brad went pale. So did my uncle. My father finally shifted, clearly growing anxious. You're digging up skeletons, Olivia, he said. I'm airing them out, I replied, because I refuse to inherit silence. Then I walked across the room and placed a thick file on the table in front of the board. These are testimonies from former staff members, people who were fired, silenced, or bullied under your watch. I invited them here today too, because if you're going to rebuild something meaningful, you start with the people you buried first. At that, the side doors opened and in walked 4 former employees. One of them was Mrs. Winslow, the housekeeper who raised me when my parents forgot I existed. She looked older but proud. She smiled at me with a quiet nod. I felt my throat tighten. My father's face? White as paper. This is a witch hunt, he spat. I stepped closer. No. This is justice. Then I turned to him, my voice low but firm. You cut me out of every holiday. You whispered lies into this family's ears for years. And when I came back to the front gate with nothing but a pie and an ounce of hope, you told me I embarrassed you. I paused. But the truth is, I reflect everything you tried to suppress. And that's why you hated me. He opened his mouth, but there were no words. Only the sound of his breath, shallow and furious. I stepped back. You are no longer allowed on Langston property without written permission. And your voting rights on the board are suspended, pending investigation. My mother gasped. Olivia. I turned to her gentler. You're welcome to stay. But if you ever ask me to leave quietly again, I'll make sure you're the one standing outside the gate. She looked down. Didn't argue. After the meeting ended, people trickled out slowly, some in silence, some whispering. Brad left with clenched fists. My uncle refused to look at me. But I didn't care. Because in the back of the room, Grandpa sat in his chair by the fireplace, nodding, his expression quiet but full of pride. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the tall windows, I joined him. We didn't say much. After a while he reached over and held my hand. You did it, he murmured. You reminded them. Of what? I asked. He smiled. That the bloodline isn't the legacy. The courage is. Later that night I stood on the balcony alone, the wind brushing against my skin. Below, the manor lights glowed like a city in the dark. I thought about every time I cried myself to sleep in a 1-bedroom apartment, wondering if I mattered. Every time I walked by this estate too afraid to knock. No. I stood above it all. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally remembered who I was. And now so had they.
The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and every conversation in the lobby froze. My heels clicked against the marble as I stepped out, confident, calm, and dressed like I belonged there. Because I did. Across the hall, my cousin Natalie's voice sliced through the air like a blade. Who let her in? She said loudly, laughing toward her friends. She's like mold, keeps coming back no matter how many times you scrub it off. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. I didn't flinch. Not anymore. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I'd spent years being the quiet one. The girl who walked away instead of fighting back, who left everything behind when my uncle suggested I wasn't fit for their world. But today wasn't one of those days. I adjusted the strap of my leather bag, walked straight toward the reception desk, and nodded at the concierge. Morning, Mark. I'll need my keys returned. Mark straightened instantly. Of course, Ms. Reynolds. Natalie's grin faltered. Ms. Reynolds?
What are you talking about?
The concierge handed me the sleek silver keycard with both hands, his tone formal. Welcome home, ma'am. Your penthouse is ready. Security will escort any unauthorized guests out. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Natalie blinked. What? Escort who out? That's when the guards appeared. 2 tall men in dark suits. Ma'am, one said politely to me, we've been instructed to clear unauthorized parties from your property. I didn't even have to say a word. They turned toward her. Natalie's smirk melted into confusion. Wait, What the hell is this? She doesn't live here. My uncle. Correction, I said softly, finally meeting her eyes. My late uncle. And the deed's been transferred. Her voice broke. You can't just. Try me. The guards moved forward. The sound of her stilettos clicking backward echoed across the lobby. She tried to laugh it off, but her face had gone pale. You're bluffing. You always were. I smiled faintly. You'll find I stopped bluffing when I stopped needing your approval. Her friends whispered as she was led toward the glass doors. Natalie spun around one last time, her voice trembling. You think this makes you better than us? I tilted my head.
No.
It just makes me the owner of the building you're being escorted out of. The doors hissed shut behind them, and for the first time in years, the silence felt like power. When the elevator doors closed behind them, I finally exhaled. My reflection in the mirrored panel looked calm, maybe even collected, but underneath that stillness, a storm was brewing. 2 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment. Back then, I was living out of a cramped apartment, working double shifts just to keep the lights on. The same cousin who'd mocked me minutes ago used to stop by only to gloat. You had your chance, Claire, she'd said once, sipping coffee from a mug I couldn't afford. You should have married someone rich instead of chasing those silly dreams. That silly dream had turned into Reynolds Holdings. My own company. I never told her how it happened. I didn't need to. Some victories speak loudest in silence. As the elevator ascended, my phone buzzed. A message from my assistant, Jason. Jason, legal transfer complete. You're now sole owner of Penthouse 47 and 48. Welcome home. I smiled faintly. Welcome home. 2 words I hadn't heard in years. When the doors opened, the penthouse greeted me like a memory resurrected, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, sunlight spilling across marble floors, and the faint scent of cedar from the furniture I'd chosen years ago before everything went wrong. I ran my hand along the back of the sofa. It was exactly how I remembered it. My uncle hadn't changed a thing since he'd kicked me out. Because family doesn't hand things to failures, he'd said, that day echoing in my head like a bad song. Natalie understands how this business works. You don't. He'd smirked as I stood by the door, my bags packed and my pride shattered. Go chase your dreams, Claire. Just don't come running back when they fall apart. And I hadn't. I'd built something from nothing, alone, bruised, and determined. I'd worked in freezing warehouses, managed inventory on night shifts, and pitched investors who laughed in my face. But the moment my startup merged with the very corporation that once fired me, everything changed. I didn't just rise. I took the seat they thought I'd never deserve. Now, standing here, the city stretched out before me like an empire finally under my name. The intercom buzzed. Mark's voice came through, cautious. Ms. Reynolds, the guests have left. They were, not very happy. Neither was I said quietly. Thank you, Mark. He hesitated. It's good to have you back, ma'am. I ended the call, but his words lingered. Good to have you back. I poured a glass of water and stared out the window. It wasn't just revenge that brought me here. It was something heavier. The kind of justice life rarely gives unless you fight tooth and nail for it. Behind me, my phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Natalie. I let it ring once.
Twice.
Then I answered. What do you want?
I said, voice steady.
Her tone was shrill, cracking under panic. You think you can just take everything? That penthouse was my dad's. You're nothing without this family. I was nothing because of this family, I replied. There was silence, then a bitter laugh. You think people respect you? You're just playing rich. Everyone knows you begged for investors. You probably sold your dignity too. I cut her off. Careful, Natalie. You're talking to the woman who signs your department's paychecks now. Her voice broke. What are you saying? You didn't check your company email this morning, did you? I said softly. Reynolds Holdings acquired Montgomery Estates last night. That means I own more than just this building. For a moment, I heard nothing, no breathing, no noise, just silence. Then she whispered, You bought us? Bought you? I let out a short laugh.
No.
I bought the company that owns your job, your condo, and your lifestyle. The rest is just paperwork. She inhaled sharply, like she'd been slapped. You can't do this. Oh, Natalie, I said, looking out over the glittering skyline. I already did. When the call disconnected, I stood there in the quiet, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, but peace. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's calm, quiet, and legal. I turned back to the room. Every inch of this space held memories, some painful, some tender. My mother's laughter echoed faintly in my mind. She'd always told me, the best kind of revenge is success they can't undo. She'd been right. The city glowed below as night began to fall. Somewhere out there, Natalie was probably raging, trying to figure out how I'd done it. But the truth was simple. She underestimated the girl she'd called weak. I wasn't weak. I was patient. And patience built empires. 2 days later, I got the invitation I knew was coming. A charity gala at the Grand Regency Hotel. The same event my family had once barred me from, saying I didn't fit the image. Now, the invitation bore my name in gold. Claire Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Holdings. Fitting, I thought. They wanted me invisible back then. Now, they couldn't host without me. When I arrived, the room was glowing with chandeliers and the low hum of expensive conversations. Waiters moved through the crowd like clockwork, trays gleaming with champagne and silver spoons. I'd been to enough of these events to know that beneath all that glitter, the whispers were sharper than glass. As soon as I walked in, heads turned. Some smiled, some stiffened, and a few whispered into their glasses. I ignored them all. The only person I was looking for stood near the piano, Natalie, draped in a scarlet gown that screamed money she didn't earn. Her eyes found me instantly. I could almost see her jaw clench. She didn't wait long. With a glass of champagne in her hand and venom in her smile, she walked straight toward me. Well, if it isn't the prodigal cousin, she said, her tone sweet and toxic. Enjoying your stay in my penthouse. My penthouse, I corrected softly. But yes, it's comfortable. Thanks for keeping it clean all those years. A few nearby guests turned to look, curious, hungry for drama. Natalie noticed and raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. Oh, please. We all know what really happened. You lucked out, didn't you? Some investor took pity on you and handed you a fortune. The air around us tensed. I smiled slightly. If that's what helps you sleep at night, go ahead. She leaned closer, lowering her voice now, sharp as a blade. You can buy buildings, Claire, but you can't buy class. Everyone still knows where you came from. Don't think money changes that. I didn't flinch. You're right, I said, tone calm. Money doesn't buy class, but it does buy microphones. Her brows furrowed, confused. At that exact moment, the host at the podium tapped the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome our newest sponsor, the woman who single-handedly rescued Montgomery Estates from bankruptcy, Ms. Claire Reynolds. Every spotlight in the room turned to me. The applause was instant, loud, real, and thunderous. I could feel Natalie's grip on her champagne glass tighten until it trembled. I stepped toward the stage, heels clicking with quiet authority. The same floor she used to walk over me on. Taking the mic, I smiled at the crowd. Thank you. It's an honor to stand here tonight. Some of you may remember me from a time when I didn't belong in rooms like this. But life has a funny way of changing the guest list. A few polite laughs echoed through the hall. I could feel Natalie's eyes burning holes into my back. I continued, steady and unshaken. This city taught me that sometimes the people who shut doors on you are just making space for you to build your own. And when you do, don't knock. Own the building. Applause again, longer this time. Cameras flashed. When I stepped off the stage, Natalie was waiting near the champagne bar, her expression unreadable. You just love humiliating me, don't you? She hissed. I met her gaze evenly.
No.
I just love the truth. She scoffed. You think you've won? You're still alone. You've got power, but no one who loves you. That one stung, but only for a second. I took a slow breath. Maybe. But I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who cheer when I fall. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Behind us, a few of her friends pretended to chat, but were clearly eavesdropping. The same women who'd laughed at me in the lobby days ago. One of them whispered, "She actually owns the building?" Natalie turned, her face paling. "Let's go," she snapped, storming toward the exit. I didn't stop her. As she disappeared through the glass doors, I turned back toward the city, lights outside. My reflection stared back, not the timid girl they'd mocked, but a woman who'd fought her way back from nothing. For a moment, I thought of my mother again. Her voice, calm and wise, seemed to echo in my head. "Never chase revenge, Claire. Just rise so high they can't reach you." Maybe I hadn't taken revenge in the way Natalie expected. No shouting, no chaos, no public breakdowns. But I'd done something far better. I turned every insult into a stepping stone. Later that night, as I left the hotel, the doorman smiled and tipped his cap. "Good evening, Ms. Reynolds. Your car's ready." I paused. My car, a black Bentley with tinted windows. The same brand my uncle once told me I'd never sit in without borrowing someone's keys. I smiled faintly as the driver opened the door. "Thank you." As the city lights blurred past, I thought about how fragile power really is, how quickly it shifts when you stop begging for it. I wasn't the same woman who used to stand outside that penthouse, holding back tears. I was the woman who owned it. And that was enough. A week passed. The city moved on, but Natalie didn't. By Monday morning, my inbox was flooded with half-truths and anonymous messages, whispers of a scandal, accusations about how I'd stolen the penthouse, even fake screenshots that looked conveniently damaging. Her style was predictable. When she couldn't win with words, she tried to destroy with lies. Jason, my assistant, stormed into my office, jaw tight. "Claire, someone's trying to spin a story online. They're saying you used insider connections to take over Montgomery Estates. The source is..."
Natalie.
I didn't react. I just leaned back in my chair and said quietly, "Let her." Jason blinked. "You're not going to fight back?" "Oh, I already did," I said, turning my laptop screen toward him. "Check the news." On the front page of the city's business journal was a headline that made him grin. "Claire Reynolds donates $5 million to housing charity for women starting over." I'd signed the papers that morning. Timing, after all, is everything. She wanted a scandal, I said, standing up, so I gave her a story. The truth one. By afternoon, reporters were calling my office, not to question me, but to praise the move. "A woman who built herself from the ground up," one article said, "now helping others do the same." Jason laughed under his breath. "That's going to burn her alive." I smiled faintly. "I don't need to burn anyone. Some people do that on their own." Later that night, as I stood by the penthouse window watching the city lights flicker, my phone buzzed again. "Natalie." This time, I answered. Her voice was quieter than before, stripped of venom. "You really went through with it," she said. "You made everyone love you." I took a slow breath. "I didn't make them love me, Natalie. I just stopped giving them a reason to doubt me."
Silence.
Then she muttered, "I wanted you to hurt. You made us all look small." "You did that yourselves," I said calmly. I just stopped playing along. She didn't reply. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. "I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Apologies weren't part of Natalie's vocabulary. "I never wanted to take what was yours," I said softly. "I just wanted to build something that was mine." The line went quiet. Then she said, almost brokenly, "I don't know who I am without the family's name." I felt something shift inside me, not pity, but understanding. "Then maybe it's time you find out," I said gently. "You're stronger than you think. You just never had to be." She hung up without another word. I stared out the window again, the skyline reflecting in the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or triumph. Just peace. Because revenge isn't about watching them fall. It's about standing tall when they thought you never would. A knock on the door pulled me back. Mark, the concierge, stepped in holding an envelope. "This just arrived for you, Ms. Reynolds." Inside was a small note, no name, no signature, just 5 words in familiar handwriting. "You earned this. Be proud." I didn't need to guess who sent it. My late uncle had written those exact words to me when I graduated college. Maybe Natalie had found one of his old letters and sent it. Maybe it was her way of saying goodbye. Either way, it didn't matter. I turned toward the window again, letting the city lights wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. I was home. Not because I owned the penthouse, but because I'd finally owned myself. And in the quiet, I whispered to the city that had watched me rise. Let them wonder how I did it. The laugh hit me first, sharp, rehearsed, meant to land like a slap, without leaving a mark. We were in a crowded rooftop restaurant downtown, all glass walls and city lights. My cousin Brielle Camden had picked the place to look expensive on photos. Engagement dinner. White tablecloths. Gold-rimmed plates. A ring on her finger that kept catching the light every time she moved her hand, like she wanted the whole room to applaud. I sat 2 seats away from her, calm face, steady hands. I wore a simple black dress, hair pinned back, makeup clean. Nothing flashy, because I didn't come to compete. I came to watch. Her fiancé, Graham Holt, was polite in that careful way, standing when older relatives arrived, shaking hands, actually listening. The kind of man who didn't talk just to hear himself. He kept looking around, like he was trying to map the family dynamic in real time. Brielle leaned closer to him, whispering and laughing, and every time she laughed, her eyes flicked toward me like a check-in. "Are you still here? Are you still small?" The server poured sparkling water. Glasses clinked. Someone joked about wedding venues. Someone else asked when the date would be. Then Brielle turned to me like she'd been waiting for a quiet moment to strike. "So, Avery," she said, sweet voice, sharp eyes. "Still doing that little computer job?" A couple heads turned. Not because they cared. Because Brielle knew how to make a question feel like a performance. I smiled politely. "Work's good." Brielle's lips curled. "Good doing what though? Like, what's your role again?" Her mom, Denise, jumped in with a fake laugh. "Oh, you know, she helps people. Like support." Brielle nodded fast, like she was confirming a rumor.
Exactly.
Support. That's what I told Graham. The word landed on the table like a label stuck to my forehead. A few people chuckled. One of my uncles smirked into his drink. Brielle's friend, some girl named Tessa, tilted her head like she was fascinated by the idea of me being unimportant. Graham's smile faded. He looked from Brielle to me, confused, not cruel, just thrown off. "Wait," he said, eyebrows knitting. "Is that true?" The table quieted. Not completely, but enough. Brielle lifted her chin like a queen waiting for the crowd to clap. I didn't rush. I didn't defend myself like I was on trial. I leaned slightly toward Graham and kept my voice calm. "One word," I said. Graham blinked. "One word." I nodded, and I delivered it clear, soft, final. "Owner." Silence. Instant. Like someone cut the music. Brielle's smile froze so perfectly it looked painted on. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again like her face couldn't decide what to do with the panic. Denise's hand jerked. Her glass tilted. The drink spilled across the tablecloth in a thin splash that felt louder than it should have. Tessa's mouth fell open. My uncle stopped chewing mid-bite. Graham stared at me. "Owner of what?" Brielle's laugh came out broken. "Oh my God, Avery, don't start. You always do this. You always want attention." I looked at her, still smiling, and for the first time that night, my smile wasn't polite. It was peaceful. "I don't want attention," I said. "I want accuracy." Graham turned slowly to Brielle. "Why would you tell me she just work support?" Brielle waved her hand like she could erase the moment. "Because it's basically the same thing. Like, she answers emails, she helps with stuff. That's not what an owner does, Graham said, voice firm now. Denise reached for control like she always did. Graham, sweetheart, don't let her confuse you. Avery exaggerates. She's. Am I? I asked, gently. I pull my phone from my clutch, slow, calm, and set it face up on the table. The screen showed a clean, official dashboard with a company logo at the top. Holt and Camden Logistics, cap table access. Graham's name was there. So was Brielle's. And so was mine above both. Graham leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he read. This is real. Brielle's face drained of color. That's not. Why do you have that? I kept my voice even. Because I signed the paperwork. Graham's jaw tightened. Brielle, what is this? Brielle snapped, finally dropping the sweet act. It's not a big deal. It's just numbers. It doesn't mean she. It means she's above you, Tessa blurted before she could stop herself. Denise shot her a look, but the damage was done. Graham stood up slightly, hands on the table. Brielle, did you know about this? Brielle's eyes darted to her mom like a lifeline. Denise swallowed. We didn't think it mattered. Graham's voice turned cold. You didn't think it mattered that the person you've been mocking at this table owns the controlling stake in our company? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the table. I didn't need drama. I let the truth sit there and do what truth does when it finally gets air. Brielle's eyes burned into mine. You did this on purpose. I tilted my head. No, Brielle. I paused, small, quiet pause that made everyone listen. You did this on purpose. For years. Tonight was just the first time it didn't work. Graham exhaled hard, then looked at me like he was suddenly trying to understand who I really was. Avery, he said carefully, why didn't you ever say anything? I held his gaze. Because I didn't need to. I was building. Quietly. Brielle's voice rose. So, what, you're going to embarrass me at my engagement dinner? I smiled again, still calm, still controlled. You embarrassed yourself, I said. I just stopped shrinking to make it easier. And as the wind shifted across the rooftop and the city hummed below, I realized something with surprising clarity. This wasn't just revenge. This was freedom. The table stayed quiet in that uncomfortable way where no one knew whether to speak or pretend nothing had happened. Brielle was the first to break it. She laughed, too loud, too fast, like volume could erase facts.
Okay, wow.
This is getting dramatic. Can we not turn my engagement dinner into some weird business meeting? Graham didn't sit back down. He stayed standing, one hand on the chair, eyes fixed on her. I'm not the one who turned it into this, he said calmly. You did when you lied. Denise jumped in again, her voice tight. Sweetheart, families exaggerate. It's harmless. I finally spoke, still seated, still calm. Calling someone just support isn't harmless. It's deliberate. Brielle's face flushed. You're always so sensitive. I met her eyes.
No.
I'm precise. That word seemed to hit harder than anything else I'd said all night. Graham picked up my phone from the table, not aggressively, just carefully, and scrolled once more. You own 42%, he said slowly. That's not symbolic. That's control. Yes, I replied. It is. He exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. And you never thought to mention this? To me? I wasn't hiding, I said. I just didn't feel the need to announce myself in rooms where I was already being dismissed. Brielle slammed her napkin onto the table. So, this was revenge? I shook my head.
No.
Revenge would have been letting you sign documents you didn't understand. I stopped that months ago. Her eyes widened. What? Graham looked between us. Stopped what? I turned to him. The expansion contract. The one that would have put the company at risk. I vetoed it. Silence again, thicker this time. Graham's mouth tightened. That deal almost went through. It didn't, I said. Because someone had to protect the business. Brielle stood abruptly. You went behind my back. I stayed seated. I went above you. There's a difference. Denise looked like she might faint. This is unbelievable. I nodded. I know. It's usually easier to believe a story where I'm smaller. Graham finally sat down, but not next to Brielle. He pulled his chair slightly away, creating a space that felt symbolic even before it was spoken aloud. He looked at her. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Brielle's voice cracked. Because it wasn't relevant. It's relevant when you mock her for it, he replied. It's relevant when you let your family humiliate someone who's been quietly keeping this company stable. Her eyes flashed with anger, then something else, fear. You're taking her side? Graham didn't hesitate. I'm taking the side of the truth. That landed harder than any insult. I stood then, not dramatically, just enough to gather my clutch. I don't want to ruin your night, I said honestly. I came because I was invited. I stayed because I was challenged. Brielle scoffed. So you're just going to walk away now? After dropping all this? I looked at her for a long second. Not with anger, with clarity. I walked away years ago, I said. Tonight, I just stopped pretending I hadn't. Graham looked up at me. Avery, can we talk? Later? I nodded. Anytime. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again, finally realizing control had slipped through her fingers. As I turned to leave, Brielle's voice followed me, sharper, desperate. You think you won? I paused at the end of the table, not turning around. I don't think in wins and losses anymore, I said quietly. I think in peace. The elevator ride down felt lighter than the air up on the rooftop. My phone buzzed before I even reached the lobby. A message from Graham. We need to review some things. And I owe you an apology. I slipped the phone back into my bag, smiling softly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I felt like I'd finally been seen. The next morning felt quieter than it should have. Sunlight spilled through my apartment windows, warm and steady, like nothing dramatic had happened the night before. I made coffee, checked emails, and sat at my kitchen table scrolling through messages that had piled up overnight. 3 missed calls from Denise, 1 from Brielle, and a long email from Graham. I opened Graham's first. He didn't waste words. He apologized for the assumptions, for not asking better questions, for letting the tone at that table turn dismissive. He asked for a meeting. Neutral space. No family. No pressure. I replied with one line.
Today.
Noon. Office conference room. By the time I arrived, the building was already buzzing. Employees moved through the lobby with laptops and coffee cups, unaware that the future of leadership was about to shift. Graham was waiting outside the room when I stepped off the elevator. Thank you for coming, he said genuinely. Thank you for listening, I replied. Inside, the room felt different than it used to. Not tense.
Clear.
The glass walls reflected the city, steady and unbothered. Graham pulled up documents on the screen. I went through everything last night, he said. Your decisions, they're solid. Conservative. Protective. I nodded. Stability isn't flashy. He smiled slightly. But it's necessary. There was a pause. Not awkward. Just thoughtful. Then he said it. Brielle didn't tell me a lot of things. I met his gaze. I know. She framed you as background, he continued. Like someone I didn't need to think about. I folded my hands. That's been her narrative for years. Graham exhaled slowly. I don't want to build a future on half-truths. That was the moment I knew the night before wasn't just a scene, it was a turning point. I'm postponing the engagement, he said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just decided. I didn't react. I didn't need to. This wasn't my choice to celebrate. I respect that, I said. He nodded. I also want to restructure leadership. Transparency. No hidden power plays. Agreed, I said. That's how trust works. We shook hands, not as family, not as rivals, but as equals. When I stepped back outside, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Brielle. I hesitated, then answered.
What?
I asked calmly. Her voice was tight. You got what you wanted. I leaned against the building's glass wall. I wanted respect. I still do. You humiliated me, she snapped. No, I said gently. You humiliated yourself by assuming I'd stay quiet. There was silence on the line. Then, softer. He's not answering my calls. I'm not responsible for that, I replied.
She scoffed.
You always act like you're above everything. I looked out at the city, busy and moving forward.
No.
I just stopped fighting to be included. She hung up without another word. That afternoon, the official notice went out. Leadership updates. Clarifications. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. By evening, messages started coming in from colleagues who'd always known my value but never said it out loud. From people who'd watched me work quietly and consistently. One message stood out.
Proud of you.
You handled it with class. I smiled. Not because I'd proven something. Because I didn't need to anymore. That night, I stood on my balcony, city lights flickering below, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying other people's misconceptions. Tomorrow would bring adjustments. Conversations.
Change.
But for the first time, it would be on my terms. And that felt like the real victory. A week later, life didn't explode the way people expect after moments like that. It settled. The office ran smoother. Meetings were shorter. Decisions felt cleaner. When I walked through the halls now, people met my eyes. Not out of fear, out of respect. Graham kept his word. Leadership was clarified, roles were transparent, and nothing happened behind closed doors anymore. There were no whispered corrections, no, just support, jokes passed off as humor. One afternoon, he stopped by my office doorway. I wanted to say this properly, he said. You built something strong. I'm glad I finally understand who I'm working with. Thank you, I replied. That means more than you think. He nodded once, then left me to my work. I didn't hear from Brielle for days. When I finally did, it wasn't dramatic. She showed up. No makeup. No performance. Just her standing awkwardly in my doorway after hours. I didn't come to fight, she said quietly. I gestured to the chair. Then sit. She did, folding her hands together like she didn't know where to put them. I was wrong, she admitted.
About you.
About how I treated you. I listened. I didn't interrupt. She swallowed. I needed to feel bigger. And you were convenient. That was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from her. I'm not asking you to fix anything, she added quickly. I just didn't want to carry this forever. I nodded. Apologies don't erase history, but they can stop it from repeating. Her eyes softened. You're not going to forgive me, are you? I smiled, not cold, not cruel. Just real. I already did. Forgiveness is for me. Trust takes time. She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Fair. When she left, I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. That weekend, I met friends for dinner, people who knew me without labels. We laughed, shared stories, made plans. No comparisons. No shrinking. Later that night, I stood in my apartment, city quiet outside, and reflected on how far I'd come. Not from her shadow. From my own silence. I didn't need to announce my success anymore. I didn't need to correct every lie. Because the truth had a way of standing on its own. I'd learned something important through all of it. You don't win by embarrassing others. You win by outgrowing the rooms that once made you feel small. And for the first time, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. The dinner table fell silent, not because of the roast chicken my mother had spent hours preparing or the flickering candles that made everything feel too formal. No, it was because of what my father had just spat across the table. You're the biggest failure in this family, he said, his voice thick with disgust. You were a mistake. His words landed like blows. Everyone sat frozen. My cousins, too stunned to chew. My aunt dropped her fork. Even my brother, always the golden child, shifted in his seat but said nothing. I sat at the far end of the table, not because there was no space, but because they always made sure there wasn't any near them. I blinked once, then twice, holding back the sting in my eyes. I would not give them my tears. Not this time. The only sound was the soft clink of my grandfather's cane tapping the floor beside his chair.
Tap, tap. Tap.
And then slam. The old man, now nearing 90, but still fierce in presence, stood up so suddenly even the dog beneath the table whimpered. His cane smacked the marble floor like a judge's gavel, making everyone jump. "Enough," he thundered, voice echoing through the lavish dining room. "It's time you all learn the truth." My father opened his mouth to retort, but Granddad cut him off with a raised hand. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. "You all think she's a mistake," he said, eyes scanning each face. "You think she's the failure?" He pointed his cane right at me. "That girl is the only one in this room who reminds me of what this family once stood for. The only one who still carries the legacy I built with these hands." A crack of silence followed. Then he turned to me. "Child, tell them what you told me last week." I hesitated, heart pounding, hands trembling in my lap. I hadn't meant for anyone else to know. But he nodded at me gently, and something in his eyes told me this was my moment. My voice was weak. I cleared my throat. "I saved the family business from collapse. 3 months ago. I didn't tell anyone. I bought out the debt under a different name."
Gasps.
My uncle leaned forward. My father stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "I didn't do it for recognition." I continued. "I did it because it meant something to me. Because Grandpa's work means something to me." The weight of that confession sat in the air. My father's voice broke the silence, hoarse now. "That's not possible, you don't even." "I taught her," Grandpa said sharply. "For the past 2 years. Every weekend. Business, contracts, negotiation. While you were all too busy pretending she didn't exist, she was learning how to lead." And just like that, the room shifted. My cousin pushed his plate away. My brother was pale. My mother sat frozen, mouth parted in disbelief. I looked down at my plate, barely touched. For the first time in years, the silence was mine. But the story was only beginning, because what my grandfather said next was a truth that would leave them all shattered. And I hadn't seen any of it coming. My grandfather reached into the inside pocket of his worn, gray blazer, the same one he always wore to family events but nobody ever respected him for. With deliberate hands, he pulled out a folded, slightly yellowed envelope and placed it on the table. He didn't say anything, just slid it across the polished surface until it stopped in front of my father. "What's this?" my father scoffed, still trying to claw back some control. "More of your—" "Open it." Grandfather's voice was quiet now. Not loud, not angry, but somehow more powerful than any scream. The air felt electric. My father reluctantly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was handwritten, my grandfather's cursive, neat and careful. I saw my father's eyes widen with each word he read. His hands, once clenched in arrogance, now trembled slightly. "I wrote this 25 years ago," Grandpa said, turning his gaze to the rest of the table. "When your mother was pregnant with her second child. You all assumed the child was an accident. A mistake. But it was no accident." I froze.
He looked at me then.
Not with sadness, but with a fierceness I didn't know he still had. "She was the child I begged them to have." Gasps echoed. "I was dying then," he continued, "or so I thought. Doctors gave me months. Asked them to give me something to live for. A legacy. They had you, son," he nodded at my father. "But I asked for one more. A child who wouldn't grow up entitled. A child raised humbly, away from all this noise. Someone who could carry forward the values this family has long forgotten." "You were born 6 months later," he said, turning to me. "And the day I held you in my arms, my condition reversed." He laughed under his breath. "They called it a miracle. I call it a second chance." My mouth parted. My chest tightened. "You never told me this," I whispered. "Because it wasn't time," he said, his eyes glistening. "But it is now." The entire table was stunned into silence. Even my mother's usual resting smug face was now unreadable. My brother's smirk had vanished completely. My father looked like he'd swallowed fire. "So you planned this?" "I prayed for her," Grandpa snapped. "And I kept praying. I watched you all push her aside, humiliate her, underestimate her. I said nothing, because I wanted to see if her spirit would break. His voice cracked now, raw with emotion. But it didn't. She stayed kind. She stayed strong. Even when you called her names. Even when she worked jobs beneath her. Even when she sat at this table like a ghost. He turned to me. I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I shook my head. No, you were always there in your own way. And suddenly, it wasn't just my father who looked ashamed. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncle's lips moved, as if wanting to speak. But nothing came. But it wasn't over. Because the truth, that letter, that was only one part of what had been buried. There was still something even I didn't know. Something that would change everything. My grandfather took a long breath, steadying himself on his cane before slowly lowering back into his chair. The weight of what he'd revealed still hung heavy in the air. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the nervous clink of someone's spoon against china. But he wasn't done. There's something else, he said softly. Something none of you know. He looked across the room, to the cabinet in the corner, the one we all thought was just for dusty photo albums and forgotten war medals. Bring me the black folder, he said. My younger cousin obeyed, without a word. Moments later, the thick leather folder was placed on the table. Grandpa opened it slowly, revealing pages of neatly clipped legal documents. This, he said, laying it flat, is my will. My father's face paled. You already have a will. We all saw it last year. No, Grandpa replied. You saw the one I wanted you to see. The real one was updated 6 months ago. Why? My aunt whispered. Why would you hide that from us? He didn't answer her. He turned to me. I made changes the day she saved the company. My heart skipped. You mean? Yes, he said. You're the sole heir now. The table erupted. My uncle stood. That's absurd. My aunt gasped. She's not even qualified. My brother shouted. She's a waitress. But my grandfather slammed his palm on the table. Enough. She's the only one who deserves it. I watched each of you squander opportunity after opportunity. You used my name for credit, for status, but none of you ever earned it. He turned to my father, eyes sharp. You taught your daughter shame. I taught her strength. And now she will carry this name forward. I sat frozen, the words not yet sinking in.
Me? The heir?
The one they said didn't belong? You made me executor of the fake will. My father growled. I made her executor of the real one, Grandpa snapped. You just didn't know. My father's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing, because deep down, he knew he had lost. Still, I wasn't gloating. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt whole. For the first time in my life, I felt seen.
Valued.
Like I hadn't lived in the shadows for nothing. But even as I tried to process it all, my grandfather looked at me with a glint in his eye. There's one more thing I need to show you, he said. And that's when he reached beneath his chair and pulled out a small wooden box. The same box I once saw him crying over, years ago, when he thought no one was watching. And what was inside that box would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. The old wooden box creaked open in my grandfather's trembling hands. It looked ordinary on the outside, plain wood, no locks, no carvings. But I knew better. I remembered being 8, wandering into his study, seeing that box half opened, and catching a glimpse of photos and letters before he shut it fast and told me gently, one day, you'll understand. That day had finally come. He set the open box on the table in front of me. Go on, he nodded. This belongs to you. I hesitated, my fingers brushing over the lid. Inside, there were letters tied in faded twine, yellowed photographs, and a small velvet pouch. I took the first letter and unfolded it. My mother's handwriting. I glanced up, startled. She was looking at her plate, her face unreadable. The letter was addressed to my grandfather, written the day I was born. I don't know if I'm ready for this, it read. I'm scared, but she has your eyes, Papa, and your fire. If I fail, please raise her right. Not to be rich, not to be perfect, but to be kind. My throat tightened. Beneath that were photos, me at age 5, holding Grandpa's hand outside the grocery store, me with paint on my cheeks during a school art competition, me asleep on his chest while he read some dusty old book. He had kept everything. "I never showed these to anyone," he said quietly. "They would have laughed, mocked you more. But I kept them. Because every time you smiled through their cruelty, I saw hope." I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a gold pendant, tiny, delicate, engraved with one word: legacy. My hands trembled. "You gave this to Grandma," I whispered. He nodded. "And now I give it to you." I looked up, eyes blurry. "Why me?" "Because you listened. You learned. You never took shortcuts. You never needed praise or money to do what was right. And that's what leadership is." Across the table, the silence was no longer contemptuous. It was uncomfortable, shameful. But I didn't want revenge. Not really. That wasn't the point. I stood up, took a deep breath. Grandpa's will stands. That's not changing. But I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm not taking anyone's house or business titles. Everyone blinked. Even Grandpa looked surprised. "I'm not here to punish you," I said, eyes locking with my father's. "I just want you to know, I didn't fail. You did. You failed to see me. And that's a burden you can carry." Then I turned to Grandpa. "But I see you. And I'll protect what you built. Not just the business. The heart of it."
He smiled then.
A small, proud, bittersweet smile. And in that moment, the weight I had carried for decades slipped off my shoulders. But even as I thought the storm had passed, Grandpa cleared his throat. "One more thing," he said softly, "before I go." He reached into the box again and pulled out an old, sealed envelope. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about blood." And what was written in that letter would explain why my father always hated me. The envelope looked older than the rest. Its edges were brittle, the seal faded but still intact. My grandfather held it gently in his weathered hands, like it contained a heartbeat. "This," he said, "was never meant to be opened unless absolutely necessary." Then he looked me dead in the eyes. And tonight is that moment. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding in my chest. Every eye in the room was on us. No one moved, no one spoke. My father's face had gone ghost white. My mother sat rigid, like she already knew what was inside. With a slow breath, Grandpa opened the envelope and pulled out a single page. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. He began to read aloud. "To my beloved father. If you're reading this, then the secret I carried with me all these years must now see the light. The truth is, the child I gave birth to on that cold November night was not James' daughter. She is someone else's." Gasps erupted around the table. My breath hitched. My stomach dropped. He was kind, gentle. A man I met before the marriage was arranged. We only had a few weeks, but I never forgot him. And when I found out I was pregnant, I knew it wasn't James. I was scared. But I was also certain that this child would be my redemption. A new beginning. The room was spinning. Grandpa looked up at my father. "She's not your biological daughter." My father stood abruptly, chair screeching.
"Lies."
"You expect me to believe this now? After all this time?" Grandpa didn't flinch. "I had the DNA test done last month. Quietly. I needed to know before I gave her everything." He handed the sealed lab report across the table. My father stared at it like it might burn him. "You hated her," Grandpa said, voice cracking. "Because somewhere deep down you knew."
"But none of that matters now."
"Because blood isn't what makes someone family. Choice does." My mother finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. I loved him, but I stayed for the sake of this family. I never told her because I didn't want her to feel like less." I stood slowly. My knees were weak, but my voice didn't falter. "I never needed to be your daughter," I said to my father. "I just wanted to be a part of this family. I gave everything I had for it, even when you gave me nothing."
He didn't respond.
His pride was crumbling, but he couldn't say a word. I turned back to Grandpa. "What do I do now?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes filled with love and gravity. You lead, he said. You heal. And you build a future that's better than our past. And I did. In the weeks that followed, I took the reins of the company, not with vengeance, but with vision. I brought in programs to help struggling employees. I started scholarships in Grandma's name. And slowly, the family that once mocked me began to see me. My father never apologized. But one day, he left a note on my desk. You've done more for this name than I ever did. Maybe that's what scares me the most. I smiled. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never a mistake. I was the miracle they didn't deserve, but the one they needed. And that truth? It set everyone free.